They say the clock is ticking to strike a deal, with towns in the state's north facing peril if action isn't taken urgently.
Canada didn't just wake up to bad news. It woke up to a national gut punch. Practically overnight, Glencore detonated a $200 million shockwave through the country, shutting down its massive copper smelter in Quebec.
Glencore's copper mine has shut down.
And shifting key operations straight into the United States like it was nothing more than a quick weekend move.
Workers emerged from underground for the final time, marking the end of an era for a city which has truly grown in tandem with its copper mining operations.
A town that built its identity around molten metal suddenly found itself staring at cold silence. A centerpiece of Canada's industrial history, one of the country's most powerful engines of economic growth, just vanished in the blink of an eye.
But with the imminent closure of a major industry, many are asking, how can Mount Isa survive a post-copper mine future?
And the craziest part? It didn't happen because copper was losing value. It happened while copper was hitting record highs. This wasn't just a closure. It was abandonment with a signature. A corporate breakup letter delivered without warning, and the fallout hit harder than anyone expected. The moment the announcement dropped, disbelief swept across Quebec. More than 1,000 workers froze in place as the words repeated in their heads. The smelter was done. This wasn't some side operation. This was the Horn Smelter, the heartbeat of Rouyn-Noranda, an industrial lifeline that kept homes warm, businesses open, and the entire North American supply chain running smoothly. For decades, the smelter processed over 300,000 metric tons of copper annually, powering everything from smartphones to electric vehicles to energy grids. It was the kind of facility that wasn't supposed to shut down, the kind that cities literally grow around. And yet, with one corporate announcement, generations of stability evaporated. The shock rippled through the town instantly. Every small business felt the quake. Cafes that relied on morning rushes, repair shops stacked with smelter-related work, suppliers that had lived off steady contracts for decades. But underneath the surface of industrial success, a storm had been brewing for years. Emissions complaints, rising regulatory pressure, and lawsuits over air quality had been tightening around the smelter like a vice.
It's been really shocking for a lot of people in the community, Lisa. Mount Isa has a population of 20,000 people, and when 1,200 employees of the mines behind us are told that they're...
The same smoke that once symbolized progress was now painted as pollution, and the community was divided between defending its jobs and protecting its health. Still, no one expected the breaking point to arrive this fast. That breaking point came in the form of a $200 million environmental upgrade bill. Glencore insisted that, without massive investment, the plant couldn't meet updated environmental standards. It was painted as an unavoidable cost, clean up or shut down. But for a global giant juggling lawsuits, aging machinery, and unpredictable markets, $200 million became the excuse. The company looked at the price tag, looked at the pressure, and chose the door. Meanwhile, politicians scrambled. Quebec's premier begged for solutions, promised help, and tried to keep hope alive. But corporate decisions don't bend to political speeches, and Glencore had already made up its mind long before the public heard the news. What made the closure feel like a stab in the back wasn't just the speed, it was the deception. Weeks earlier, Glencore executives publicly denied closure rumors.
Mining company Glencore is working on plans to close one of its mines in Greater Sudbury, and the union is making sure its members stay working elsewhere within the company.
They called the reports misleading, reassured workers, and shut down panic. Employees went back to their shifts, believing they still had a future. Then November 3rd arrived, and with it, the truth. Reuters confirmed the shutdown. Industry insiders backed it. Markets reacted instantly, with copper prices shooting upward. Suddenly, factories across North America were rethinking their orders, scrambling to secure supply, and bracing for shortages. The Horn Smelter didn't just serve Quebec. It fed an entire continent, and now that artery had been cut clean. For workers, the reaction was heartbreak. People stood outside the gates, staring at the place that had shaped their entire adult lives, their parents' lives, even their grandparents. Decades of sweat, gone. The shock turned into anger, then grief, then a feeling of pure betrayal. And that feeling only deepened when the real twist surfaced. While Quebec braced for unemployment and economic collapse, Glencore quietly rerouted its operations to the United States. The same company that claimed environmental upgrades were too expensive suddenly found U.S. facilities far more suitable. Translation: fewer regulations, cheaper compliance, easier profit.
As well as a lack of long-term planning and letting people know that this was going to happen.
It wasn't that Glencore couldn't keep operating in Canada. It simply didn't want to. And that raised a brutal question. How could a nation rich in critical minerals lose control of its own supply chain this easily? The closure didn't just expose cracks in the system, it split them wide open. Canada's resource sector had already been increasingly dominated by foreign ownership, and now one of the country's final pillars of industrial independence had fallen. The Horn Smelter wasn't just a factory, it was a symbol of Canadian capability. When it went dark, it signaled that Canada no longer controlled the fate of its own industries. It merely hosted them until corporations found a better deal elsewhere. Globally, the shutdown triggered a cascade. The timing couldn't have been worse. Indonesia and Chile were also facing smelter shutdowns, turning copper into the hottest commodity on the planet. At over $1,200 per ton, manufacturers began panicking.
The critical minerals that some people say are under the ground. The state's treasurer will have him on the program a bit later, but he has announced some help for Mount Isa.
Electronics companies delayed shipments. EV producers warned of shortages. Even defense sectors raised alarms. One smelter in Quebec had tilted the balance of global supply, proving just how fragile the world's systems really were. It didn't take war or disaster, just one corporation flipping a switch.
Connects countries and allows economic growth, which allows people to be educated, which gives way to new ideas. So through that process, things that we can't fathom today will be the norm in 100 years' time.
Back in Rouyn-Noranda, the consequences were far more personal. The town's economy unraveled at frightening speed. Families faced eviction. Small businesses shuttered. Young people quietly planned their exit. Even with promises of retraining and relocation, workers knew the truth. Copper wasn't just a job here. It was the identity of the region.
Not in the long run, no, Ross. Obviously, you know the answer to that. And they're not the only company with their hand out in Australia at the moment. And we have to ask why we've lost all our competitive advantages and why the government continue to pursue policies.
Without it, the town's future dimmed. And while politicians scrambled, protested, and promised solutions, none of it rebuilt the smelter or restored the jobs. Meanwhile, south of the border, the U.S. received a gift-wrapped industrial boost. New jobs, new production, renewed supply. Everything Canada lost, the U.S. gained. The same copper that once fueled Canadian industry was now contributing to America's, stamped with a different flag. The smelter's silence became the loudest warning Canada had heard in decades. It wasn't just losing factories. It was losing economic power, leverage, and industrial independence.
Say it's simply not financially viable to dig further down at what is already the deepest mine of its kind in the country, spanning almost 2 kilometres into the earth. Workers who wrapped up their time with the company at this mine last night were treated to a moonlight barbecue when they clocked off. Here's what they had to say when leaving work last night for the final time.
And with other facilities like the CCR refinery hanging in uncertainty, the future looked even shakier. As the furnaces cool and dust settles, one reality becomes impossible to ignore. This was never about environmental standards or difficult decisions. It was about profit. A multi-billion-dollar company chose the cheapest path, and a nation paid the price. Workers lost jobs, a town lost its lifeline, and Canada lost a cornerstone of its industrial identity. The Horn Smelter now stands as a monument to what happens when a country's resources depend too heavily on foreign hands. If you want more deep dive stories like this, where we unpack the drama, the decisions, and the corporate moves reshaping nations, make sure to hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what comes next.